They said he had no right to the life he did not earn. They called him reckless, a liar, a thief. They dragged him across the red dust street in front of the motor park, left him with a face full of gravel and a reputation even the neighbors could not bring themselves to salvage. Above the concrete and the market cries, beyond the rumble of buses and the mechanized prayers of grinding metal, a gate of black iron shut behind a different kind of life, where truth could be folded and placed in a drawer like a ledger entry. Neat, silent, and impossible to open. Jacob's palm pressed against his mouth to staunch the taste of blood. The little toy car he had been carrying, a battered blue thing with a missing wheel, his son's favorite, had scuffed his knuckles. The same toy was the reason he had come to St. Nicholas Hospital that night. He wanted to see the child once more, to feel in his hands the small certainty that this was his son. Instead, he found a sleeping palace of strangers and a sister whose smile fit like a blade. Amanda Okoro watched the city like a woman who measured weather in ledger sheets and the rise and fall of her people's fortunes. The Okoro mansion sat like a folded hand on one of the Lagos heights, its gates heavy as judgment. Inside, light cooled into glass and marble. Servants moved like a soft rumor. She had spent her life building empires from iron and deal-clipped contracts. She had also spent her later years learning the loneliness wealth brings, the kind of silence that answers you back in the dark. She had expected joy when the pregnancy test in the private clinic turned the world a softer color. At 43, the prospect of a child was not a naive fantasy, but a gamble she was willing to place everything on. The son she imagined, an heir, a companion, was a warm presence she began to arrange the house for. A nursery painted in gentle creams, a shelf of books she had started buying and not yet read, an extra driver's salary tucked into envelopes for a future she could count on. Amaka, the name she adopted when she wanted to sound like the woman she thought she deserved to be, stood at the periphery of that counting. Twin in birth, but not in fortune, she had known Amanda as both mirror and grievance. Where Amanda had inherited little and made much, Amaka had inherited envy and learned the art of strategic affection. She could fold herself into the role of the concerned sister as easily as she could fold a wedding invitation into a pocket. Her family called her cunning. Strangers called her flattering. Amanda called her sister, until the night the space between them became legal tender. Amaka arrived at the hospital with false hands and a practiced sorrow. She wore a dress of cheap silk that read expensive under the fluorescent lights. A pale blue scarf tossed like a strap of calm across her shoulders. When she smiled at the nurses, they relaxed. When she touched Amanda's wrist, Amanda recognized, absurdly and with a stab of gratitude, the feel of her twin's small bone. Chisom, Amaka's eldest son, watched the world as if it were a set of testable objects. He had a boy's predatory patience, the kind of child who learns quickly which adults will flinch and which will not. He was close to his mother, shadowing her like a small, obedient animal. Emma, the younger boy, shrugged at the edges of everything. He was drawn to screens and shallow comforts, not yet the engineer of cruelty Chisom would become. Jacob had never imagined this life for himself. He fixed buses and sump pumps and anything with an engine that refused to sing. His hands were always stained with oil, his breath often carrying the metallic tang of the city. Mariam, his wife, had once told him they were the sort of people who built things that lasted. She meant engines and reputations both, and both things had been mighty once. When Amanda and Jacob allowed themselves the dream of a child, it was as fragile as a new bearing, essential, hopeful, but easily fouled by the smallest scrap of grit. On a humid dawn that smelled of distant rain and fried plantain, Amanda arrived at St. Nicholas in a van borrowed from the hospital's private list. She walked the hallways with the steady grace of someone who had never learned to be small. The nurses, young, polite, practiced, doted. Dr. Admi, known as Adi to those who had reason to speak of him kindly, was chosen by Amaka months prior, during a casual coffee. It had been a quiet meeting. A slip of money passed beneath a napkin. A promise that sounded like a whisper. A favor for both our families. Admi had a wife in Ibadan, a mortgage, and a conscience that measured itself in increments. He thought his compromise would carry a single night's weight. He was wrong. The nursery at 2 in the morning was another world. Incandescent lamps hummed. Cribs sat in a clean row, each baby wrapped in a hospital blanket, labeled with tags that fluttered like the only remaining proof of identity. The blue blanket, an unremarkable hospital weave with a frayed corner, stood out in Amanda's nursery because she had insisted on it. The color reminded her of the first house she and Jacob had rented together, of afternoons spent under a sky that promised more than it could ever deliver. Amarka wore hands of water and smiles as she passed nurses. She spoke in the kind of sisterly voice that carries no threat. Her palm brushed Amanda's cheek, and Amanda felt briefly the old twin warmth. When Amanda slept after the labor and the night quietly grew heavy with the city, it was not horror that moved the house. It was a plan with the patience of long rancor. Dr. Admi's fingers trembled when he did what Amarka asked. It was a short, precise ritual. Switch 2 sleeping bundles, replace one tag with another, slip a quiet set of papers into the archive bin. He told himself he was saving a woman from a life of loneliness. Or perhaps he told himself he was ensuring favor for a future debt. The money he received sat in his pocket like a stone. He listened to a baby's near breath and felt the enormity of his small decision for the first time. There are moments in a life when time reduces to the thickness of a blade. For Jacob, the night the switch happened, time sharpened into a single line. He had come to the hospital to see his son because he had dreamed of touching that small hand, because the city at dawn often made him honest. He had been stopped by a security guard with a printed list that did not include his name. He had argued, softly at first, then with the clenched edges of fear, before a man from the gate pulled him aside. Chisholm, who had been loitering nearby, watched with a small, satisfied smile. Amarka watched too from a distance, her expression as bland and careful as a pressed photograph. Someone shoved him into the back of a minibus and beat him until he could not remember properly why he had come. He woke on the concrete with the toy car beneath his cheek and a note tucked into his shirt. Stay away. In the days after, the rumor grew with the speed of oil spilled on asphalt. The mansion's driver, a man paid to mind appearances, said Jacob had been drunk, had threatened the baby, had been seen lurking by the nursery. Photographs of the bruise on his face appeared in the wrong hands and were circulated like evidence. A man like him couldn't be trusted with a child, someone said when the crowd gathered to watch Amanda leave for church. Amanda left the hospital with the child wrapped in the blue blanket. Peter, so named in a half-remembered prayer for steadfastness, was small and uncomplaining. His eyes were an inland of soft gray. The doctor's gentle mention of congenital cataracts softened in Amanda's ears into a strange grief and strangely resolve. She would give him everything. She would chart his life in degrees of comfort and thereby make up for any misfortune she thought she had not been given as a girl. She arranged specialists, bought toys that made noise and bright lights, hired tutors who spoke with calm authority. The mansion, which had built itself into a self-protecting mechanism, did its work well. It covered holes with gold and sent out notices to the city that everything was controlled. Outside those gates, Jacob's life unpeeled faster than anyone could stitch it back. Mariam tended their small house and worked the same hours she always had, washing and mending for neighbors and slowly learning the shape of shame. The mechanic's bench, once a place that smelled of machine oil and laughter, became a place that gathered only customers who could not look him in the eye. He tried to work. He tried to explain. People ask questions in a way that is already answered by their silence. The first week after the birth, Someone tried to burn the fuel pump shop where Jacob worked. It did not take. A neighbor tipped off the owner, and a bucket of water stood between resolution and catastrophe. The next week, a short article appeared online, thin and sour, suggesting Jacob had been seen exchanging envelopes with men outside the hospital. The article was vague enough to be plausible and accurate enough to be damning. The more the city talked, the smaller Jacob felt. He had no lawyer who took his calls. He had fingers that always smelled faintly of oil and a reputation that fed on rumor the way the okra stew fed on the last of his strength. One evening, when his bruises had not yet gone, two men in plain clothes found him at the welding bench and gave him a choice that was less choice than it was legislation. Stay away from the child, or they would make sure everyone knew the kind of father he was. He did not answer. Mariam folded into herself in the doorway and watched the man she loved become someone she no longer recognized. The town decided the verdict for him, and it stuck to his heels like a stain. If truth is a thing that can be buried, then the Okoro mansion was a mausoleum built for it. Inside, Amaka's influence moved like air conditioning through the corridors, unseen but shaping every breath. She came to visit as often as was necessary, carrying casseroles that never tasted quite like Mariam's, but looked the same. She played the role of the concerned sister well in public, taking tea, offering a shoulder, while privately counting the small victories that became her currency. A cashier for Amanda's corporation did not notice the devices Amaka moved from one account to another. A junior nurse misplaced a file and found her conscience lightened with excuses. The blue blanket stayed, a small island of color in the mansion's neutral seas. Amanda tied her hopes to it because sometimes hope needs a fabric anchor. She coaxed Peter to a set of early therapies. She learned to talk to him in patient tones and to accept the idea that her child would not see the world the way she did. The house pivoted around that lesson and made the pivot into luxury. Ramps, braille labels on toys, a tailor in the compound making clothes with tactile tags. Amanda's kindness unfurled like a flag. Those who loved her applauded. Those for whom she had been an irritant simmered. Meanwhile, at St. Mary's, the orphanage that smelled of sweet starch and old stories, Phililip, given that name by a woman who had pulled him from a corner of the street and christened him with the hope that he would become something sturdier, grew into a boy who read like a hunger. The orphanage, a stolid building down a secondary road, had a director who loved the children like a duty and a fault. Time folded Phililip into a life governed by strict meal times, shared blankets, and the kindness of volunteers who brought him books. He was thin at first. He was brilliant later. He made a toy of a ball of discarded wire and taught himself how to wind it into a small, smooth engine. The nuns did not have many resources for talent, but they had faith and a woman who kept records with an obsessive neatness. In the mansion, a small item, a hospital tag with a number smudged and an initial faintly visible, was placed in a drawer for reasons that seemed at once sensible and perfunctory. Admi had given the tag to Amaka with a look that measured favor and fear. It would be one of the things she would keep in a box labeled baby, next to the invoices for the specialist visits and a tiny bracelet from the private kindergarten. A tag is small, paper-thin. It ought not to hold such power, but any object that can confirm where a life began becomes dangerous in hands prepared to be dangerous with it. The city, of course, did not halt to consider the subtleties. Jacob's beating became a street story that told itself. People liked tall tales and closed mouths to the weak. When a neighbor gave him a certificate that said he was a father of a certain child, and someone else showed a photograph where he looked wild-eyed, wary, and broken, the mind made a picture. The truth, the quiet, particular truth of what happened in the sterile nursery, under the watchful humming light, was folded and put away. A woman at St. Mary's named Grace watched Phililip with a careful, private fondness. She saw him read by the single lamp at night, saw him disassemble a broken radio and reattach bits in ways that made the salvaged things sing. She kept a notation in the files. Brilliant, but also not enough. She worried about the boy's small hands and what the city's hunger might do to them. She did not know, and no one at the orphanage had reason to doubt, that a child a few streets away in a shimmering house was thought to be someone else's son. There are indignities worse than being beaten. For Jacob, one of them was the way men who had once shared a cup of afternoon tea now turned their backs. Another was the whispered suggestion at the motor park that he had tried to sell the child, a suggestion that required no proof, because proof had already been made unnecessary by the shape of the world. A poor man, a wealthy woman, a child between them. The city stacked its presumptions like plates, heavier against those who slept in windowless rooms. Amid all of this, Amanda was not immune to the cost of the lie she would never find out she was living. The blindness took its toll in ways that were not merely physical. She came to love Peter because she had to, because the child's trust landed like a small bird in her palm and would not let go. She dreamed him into being. She bought him music boxes and had a tutor who taught him to locate footprints by sound. Sometimes, when the nights were long and the house made its expensive sounds, she would look at the toy car left on the nursery floor. The blue paint flaked off at one corner, and imagine the hands that had once made it. Each morning, between the laundry of appointments and shareholder meetings, Amanda walked the nursery and touched the blue blanket. She did not suspect betrayal yet. Betrayal is patient and rarely admits itself in visible ways. Instead, it acts like a slow rot behind paint. Amarka had reasons any bitter heart might recognize. She saw what wealth had done to her sister and wanted, with the clear cruelty of someone who has been rewarded for small victories, to make that tenderness into something she controlled. She liked control. She liked the idea of molding fate for the satisfaction of watching it walk the way she wanted. She told herself that she deserved this. It is much easier to transform envy into moral righteousness when you can find a justification that sounds respectable. Jacob tried to speak up once. He went to the gate of the mansion, where the iron had its soft glitter, carried the toy car like an offering. He banged on the metal with knuckles that still bore bruises. The driver gave him a cup of cold coffee and told him to go home. A security guard asked him to leave. Someone took a photograph of him. It circulated. He came asking for his son. Mariam told the neighbors as if the words carried proof, but they were only words. Proof requires paper, signatures, a hospital ledger that agrees with the claim. Those were missing. A rumor began to twist into a plan. If Jacob could be portrayed as the kind of man who stormed the nursery and threatened a child, then the facts that had been hidden could remain hidden. Amarka had friends in places where facts could be made to look like choices. Dr. Admi had purposeful gaps in his memory and a collection of small, tightly folded lies in his desk. The mansion closed in, began to move like a hand over a pot that boiled. The first months after the birth became a litany of contradictions. Amanda's businesses had a leak, some accounts misdirected to shell companies that Amarka's half-whispered counsel had assured could be controlled for the family. In one quiet private meeting, Amarka suggested that Amanda hire a new head for philanthropy, a woman who would bring a veneer of social conscience to the Okoro name. The new employee remarked, gently and with all the condescension of the well-educated, "You shouldn't see the people who come to places like this. It's safer to have them at arm's length." No one saw that the arm's length was being measured for reasons beyond safety. At the motor park, the toy car changed hands. A boy with sticky fingers sold it for peanuts. The blue paint flaked into the dust, like a small, insoluble truth. Jacob found himself with fewer customers and more questions. A man whom he had once fixed a bus for turned his face away from him in line at the neighborhood well. The city rearranged itself until Jacob no longer fit easily into its angles. He began to go to the hospital sometimes at dusk, trailing like an absent ghost. He would stand on the other side of the perimeter wall and watch the Okoro gate close and open. The glow of the house's outer lights made a halo in the dust. Inside, a child slept in a scented nursery, and someone loved him the way they did because love had been given the trappings. The walls of the mansion did their work very well. The world beyond could not see what was inside, and the world inside arranged its stories to match what the world outside would believe. Months slid into a kind of tired year. The orphanage filed its reports. Dr. Admi continued to work nights and to sleep badly. Jacob's hands learned to cradle quiet rage, as if it was something he could hang like a coat. Mariam told him not to let his anger become a habit, because habits are hard to break for a man with grease under his nails. The city continued to talk. The blue blanket, the tag, the toy car, the hospital ledger. These were small things. Yet small things can become a pilgrim's route to truth if someone begins to notice them at the right time. For the moment, the truth had been wrapped in linen and put into a drawer inside a mansion where other truths were stored. It lay there like a quiet thing that wanted to be discovered by a hands hard enough and stubborn enough to pry. Jacob, with his hands that smelled of grease and hope, would be one of those hands. But first, there were other fights to be lost, other nights to be beaten into submission. His framing was only beginning to take shape in the way people whispered his name, and in the way the story had been rewritten to accommodate the mansion's convenient narrative. A poor, dangerous mechanic, a rich, grieving mother, a sister with a clever hat. When Amanda signed a check for another round of specialists, she felt, foolishly, a new steadiness. She would give everything to the child she believed was hers. She had no idea that somewhere, in a file box with a label that had been half peeled and smoothed back down, a tag waited to be noticed. She did not yet know the name of the man who would be blamed for every dark thing that crept into the edges of their lives. She did not know the price she would pay for the safety she was buying. Late one night, as a thunderstorm gathered over the lagoon and the mansion hummed with its private currents, Amanda found herself standing by the nursery window, touching the blue blanket. Peter slept with a slow, mountain breath rhythm. For a moment she thought she saw, in the faint reflection on the glass, the smudge of a forgotten tag, numbers and a letter that did not match the record at the hospital. She called for the house manager to bring the birth records and, because the house always complied, someone fetched a leather folder from the safe. The folder was neat. It contained invoices and an address for a private specialist. It contained a small pile of receipts. A single tag, folded in wax paper, lay at the bottom. The number on it had been partially rubbed out, but a curious thing remained. A faint impression of letters that did not match the name on the certificate. Amanda could not tell what the letters were. Not yet. A pulse of unease moved through her, the kind you do not voice because the house is built around confidence. She placed the tag on the nursery table and went to sleep with the soft noise of the storm filling the rooms. Outside the gates, Jacob slept in a borrowed porch, the toy car under his pillow. His dreams were a residue of pain and the long memory of a child's laugh. He woke before dawn and watched the city breathe. He still had not enough proof to speak, but he had enough of a feeling that something terrible had been done to him to compel him forward. He was a man with hands that could fix machines and little else. The city waited. The mansion slept. The truth lay behind a door no one yet had the key to, and the world had already chosen its villain. The poor mechanic was framed, his name folded into rumor and fear. Inside the house, a piece of paper shifted under the hush of a lamp, as if impatient to be read. If stories like this pull you in and leave you restless, if you want to see how the threads begin to loosen and who will finally find the hidden things under the marble, stay with it. Like and subscribe. There are doors that open only after a long knock, and someone will knock them. The world does not always wait for the meek to shout. After that night in the nursery, small things started to move. A nurse who had been at St. Nicholas the night 2 infants were mixed up took a transfer to a clinic in Ibadan, and with her went a ledger that had been mothballed. Dr. Admi's hands became clumsier at work. He began to forget names. Amarka, smooth and measured as ever in public, began to walk faster in private, as if she were trying to outrun the very shadow she had cast. Jacob found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time again. Someone accused him of harassing a driver. Someone else saw him near the hospital, and the story grew like mold. That afternoon, 2 men with blank faces shoved him against the wall and told him, with corporate smiles, to drop the pursuit. He was beaten in an alley by men whose names were not spoken aloud, and whose pay would never be traced to a source that mattered. When he stumbled into the market, the whispers followed. He had threatened the child. He had sold him. He had not been there in time. He was unclean. Mariam pressed his head to her chest and did not know how to clean him. Neither did the city. Meanwhile, Philip at St. Mary's sat on the orphanage steps and watched a passerby adjust the strap of a child's backpack. He was learning to model the world with geometry, where a favor could be obtained, how much worth a story could carry. He found a broken watch one day, and with patient hands, reassembled it. The watch kept time for them all, even though none of them owned anything truly durable. Inside the mansion, a gardener found a scrap of paper not belonging to any ledger, a faded hospital tag, blue thread stuck in its edge. The gardener, who had an affection for secrets small as seeds, pressed it into his pocket and did nothing with it for a week. When he finally brought it to the nursery manager, she frowned and slid it into the folder where such things vanish. Secrets prefer the company of other secrets. They hide in drawers, in safe boxes, in the soft memory of a nurse who has been paid to forget. They grow like fungus in corners left unseen. For now, the city had picked its scapegoat, and the mansion had tucked the truth into the hollow of its heart. But courage does not always announce itself with banners. Sometimes it comes as a hand that refuses to let go of something small, a battered toy car, a letter that does not belong, a night nurse's thin unease. The story was only beginning to move. The slow gears of consequence had been set. The poor mechanic was framed, and the truth slept under marble and chandeliers, waiting for someone stubborn enough to pull it free. The scrap of paper, the hospital tag with its frayed blue thread, sat too long in the nursery manager's drawer. It was a small, ordinary thing, and that ordinariness made it dangerous. Ordinary things were easier to ignore. Weeks slipped by, and the tag became a rumor in the house, a thing the gardener mentioned to no one, an item the nursery manager folded into the safe beneath invoices and appointment lists. Secrets gather friends by neglect. They attract other small lies that sit comfortably beside them. When the night nurse moved to Ibadan, she carried with her an old ledger tucked beneath her arm because she believed, in a way she could not explain, that some departures should be accompanied by proofs. The ledger was moth-eaten at the corners and smelled faintly of disinfectant and prayer. It contained a night roster and a notation, a number that seemed to match the faint impression on the tag. The ledger was the sort of thing a sensible person might have burned, but a sensible person was not what the hospital had in that ward. She put it in her bag because leaving things behind felt like a sin. Dr. Admi slept badly for months. He dreamed in small, repetitive patterns. Babies' labored breaths, the feel of money like a lead weight. Amarka's smile folded into a promise. He began to skip shift handovers, drop charts, lose phone numbers. Guilt was not a dramatic visitor in his life. It came as a persistent itch, as if his palms remembered something his mind tried to mediate. He started answering fewer calls. When Amanda's legal counsel called him, he answered with a voice that sounded empty. Inside the mansion, Amanda's suspicion hardened into a slow, precise instrument. The first unnameable worry, nothing more than an anomalous number on a tag, a wayward ledger entry, became an obsession. She had spent a life trusting auditors and accountants to find the smell of misdirection. She knew now how facts could be persuaded into silence. She did not yet suspect exact treachery. She suspected pattern. She asked questions that made people uncomfortable, and in a household where discomfort was for the servants, that was enough to begin unrest. A lullaby that had played over Peter's crib since his first weeks in the house, an old coastal tune Amanda's mother used to hum, kept returning to her in the quiet hours. She hummed it without thinking, and the melody threaded through scenes of other lives. Jacob at his bench, Mariam folding clothes, Philip elsewhere taking apart a manual watch. The song became a metronome to the unraveling. The incident that finally pulled the threads loose happened on a Friday afternoon, with the sun already hollowed by rain clouds. Chisholm had been easy to miss for months. He hovered in the mansion like a shadow that waited for someone to notice it. He learned cruelties, like you learn a trade, by watching other people's reactions and measuring the pain that obtained the largest yield. Peter's blindness made him an object of both pity and fascination. To Chisholm, it was easy currency. He would follow Peter with questions about how he bathed or ate, and when those questions did not entertain him, he set traps, subtle inconveniences, designed to elicit a fear or a cry, something to be stored and tasted later. On that afternoon, a caregiver was late with an ointment Peter used to soothe a sore head. Peter had been rummaging through the nursery, fingers finding textures as if reading Braille. Chisholm saw him like a test he could administer. He reached for a sliding loose toy car that often sat at the edge of the rug, and in the small scramble, Peter lost his balance near the top of the servant staircase. It was quick and stupid. Chisholm did not intend more than a shove. In other hands, a shove is a shove and nothing else. In a house taught with deceit, a shove can become anything. Peter tumbled down a short flight of stairs and hit the landing with a sick, small sound that made waves in Amanda's chest. Someone screamed, an inelegant animal sound, and the hush that had always lived in that mansion opened with a sound like a cracked bell. Peter was alive, but he was not unmarked. Blood washed a pillowcase, and the nurses arrived with practiced forms. Amanda, who had been at a board meeting when the house manager called, dropped everything and ran. The hospital's emergency protocol was efficient, the kind that happens in houses used to 1,000 small mazes of money being navigated for them. They arranged a transfer to St. Nicholas because of the child's complicated needs. Amanda rode in a car that moved too quickly and too smoothly for the calamity in her hands. In the ambulance, someone mentioned transfusion, standard precaution, and the word opened another door in her mind that she had not known was shut. At St. Nicholas, the clinicians ran tests that made no pretense of brevity. Amanda watched nurses draw blood from Peter's small arm and thought for a moment of Jacob's broad, oil-stained hands. When the lab results came back, they did a thing that felt like an accusation. The child's blood type did not match the one on Amanda's certificate of birth. The lab technician kept her voice flat, as if in a library where the noise was supposed to be carried in whispers. Amanda felt the world tilt. Her first thought, impulse rather than deduction, was that the hospital had made an error. Later, when she stood in a glass office and watched a printout of numbers she did not comprehend, the consequence of those numbers did not feel farther than the cold touch of glass. There are bureaucracies that can be trusted and ones that can be convinced. St. Nicholas had always been the sort you trusted. It had records, and those records would not lie. This was the first real fracture in the mansion's self-sustaining myth. The managers who had replaced discomfort with golden trimming could not replace laboratory figures. Amanda became the sort of woman who insisted on facts. She called for the birth records. She demanded to see the chain of custody, the small documents that stood in for truth in a world that otherwise traded in impressions. Her legal team arrived with quiet persistence, and a calm that made men fold their defenses like maps. Dr. Admi, who had once thought his compromise a small, manageable thing, found himself watched. Amanda's lawyers wanted to know who had been on duty. They wanted to know which nursery tags had been assigned to which infants. Admi stammered initially, then offered a practiced sequence of answers that smelled of plausible deniability. He said the tags had been misfiled. He said the ledger had been misplaced. He said a night nurse could have made a mistake. Each answer slid on the surface of the problem without offering purchase. Amanda did not take excuses. She used the mansion's quiet resources. An old friend in the health department who understood that the difference between a public scandal and a private mistake was often the willingness to look, and asked formally for archival footage. Hospitals kept CCTV to the degree that administrators could pretend they did so for safety. Sometimes they kept tapes for years, sometimes for weeks. St. Nicholas's policy was not, in the end, the point. The point was that Amanda could make it the point. She could ask with enough insistence that others would respond. At the hospital, a clerk with a conscience, or simply an irritation with being bullied, found an old backup drive. It was the sort of object that holds the weight of many unremarked hours. A small circuit board, a data set, and a folder labeled Nursery Night 2000X. The drive would have been disposed of if not for the clerk's neatness. He handed it, with the kind of small defiance that changes more than it intends, to the lawyer who had come to his office asking for patience. When the footage came up on the monitor in Amanda's study that night, the image was grainy and mercifully anonymous. A corridor lit by fluorescence, the nursery door ajar, two shadows, a brief exchange, 3 cribs moving in the space between. The camera watched in the fixed way technology watches, lacking pity and lacking motive. It simply recorded. On the monitor, 2 bundles were moved, gentle hands, a slip of cloth, the substitution of tags like a trick of hands, and a man in a white coat, whose face Amanda could not at first place, bent and touched them, as if ensuring the motion was final. Amaka's face, for a moment, was a map of composure. She moved as if in air, her hands arranged to be concerned, her eyes a practiced sorrow. Chisholm hovered like a child around her, excitement shading his features in a way that made Amanda's heart harden. The camera caught Admi's slow, careful movements, the kind practiced by someone more used to clinical decisions than criminal ones. The footage was a slow accretion of shame, frame after frame, proving what no one had yet dared speak aloud. Amanda did not weep then. There are times when people behave as if tears will atomize the clarity they need. She stood very still and watched, and something in her unmade the mansion's polished surface. The household staff gathered outside the study in clusters, the way small animals gather to see if danger has a shape they can accept. When the footage ended, the hush in the room landed differently than it had before. It felt like the air after a window is opened in a house that for months had collected the smell of something hidden. She called Jacob. Her voice on the phone was a remarkable thing, soft but precise. She told him the basics and asked him to come to the house. When he arrived at the iron gate, wearing the clothes that made him an outsider in the same way a uniform made someone an insider, the cameras on the mansion recorded his face as if noting a specimen. He came in despite the way the neighborhood watched him, despite the way his name had been treated like used paper. He came because even men with hands thick with oil sometimes insist on rubbing a wound before it scars. The meeting between Amanda and Jacob had no audience but the house. They stood in the nursery, and Amanda placed the monitor on a table between them. On screen, the movement became fact. Jacob watched himself in the grainy light, remembered the shove, the beating, the toy car under his cheek, the note that had told him to stay away. The footage was a mirror that reflected the version of his life he had never been allowed to tell. He felt vindicated and raw at the same time. Vindication tasted like metal. It did nothing to mend the bruise on his chest, but it meant the city might be forced to notice the error it had made. Amanda's legal team moved like tidewater. They petitioned the hospital for the original tags and medical records and requested a restriction on anyone removing evidence. They reached out to St. Mary's with the sort of humility that opens doors: money, legal assurance, and a respect for the work Grace and the orphanage had done. They explained the need for a DNA test. There are practicalities to all of this: consent forms, chain of custody documents, and the wearing patience of court clerks. Amanda signed things in a flurry and then spent nights awake, thinking of how many small lies had stacked to make so large a theft possible. When Amanda walked into the orphanage for the first time, she felt a sense of being unmoored. St. Mary's smelled of starch and old paint, and sunlight passed through the lattice windows in a way that made the dust visible. Grace met her with a careful, assessing smile and a hand that closed on hers like someone testing for truth. Philip was reading on the steps, his face calm and focused in a way that made him look older than his years. And when Amanda first saw him, she felt a sudden and dizzy recognition that had nothing to do with the courts. He had the same shape of mouth as Jacob, that same way of holding an object as if it were a problem to be solved. He looked up, blinked, and then returned to his page. The first meeting was awkward. Amanda could not rush into declarations and could not present the child with suits and lawyers. She sat on a bench while Grace explained the paperwork and how the orphanage had kept the boy. She asked about his birth certificate. She learned that St. Nicholas had recorded a name that did not match the tag on the ledger the nurse had kept. The facts, like fingers in a latch, moved until the door opened. Philip was shy at first. He had been taught in the orphanage that adults came and went with promises. The constancy of present affection was a rarer thing. But he was curious, and his curiosity was not easily cowed. He allowed Amanda to speak in measured sentences, and his eyes read the sound of her voice as if it was something to be examined. When Amanda produced a photograph, a fragile baby notebook with a scrawled number the orphanage's director had kept for years, tucked like a charm inside, Philip's face changed in the way of someone noticing a small, mechanical fail. He became intensely, blankly present. The DNA confirmation was not immediate theater. It was an administrative culmination of a series of exact processes that had the clumsy solemnity of bureaucracy. Swabs, papers, signatures, each made the claim quieter and more official. The lab technician brought the results to Amanda's legal counsel in an envelope that felt too small. Jacob stood nearby, his cheeks hollow with washed-out fatigue, his fingers like the rest of him, impatient for proof. When the technician read the report and said the words that meant kinship, shared markers, impossibility of error, the room changed. The envelope was opened. The truth announced itself in dry, clinical sentences. The announcement did not erase years of absence. It did not make up for the steady rumor that had created a courthouse of judgment against Jacob in the streets. Nor did it undo what had been taken from Philip. Years of institutional routines, the ache of not belonging to a family one did not recognize, but it gave them the right to be seen. Amanda brought Philip back to the mansion, the way someone moves a fragile artifact from dusty display to bright light. He looked at the blue blanket, esoteric, as if a talisman, and his fingers reached for it with casual curiosity. He did not see its meaning yet. He held the toy car Amanda had placed on the edge of the nursery shelf and turned it slowly, like someone who wanted to learn its mechanics. The car's chipped paint and missing wheel made him smile in an absent, small way that pulled at something in Jacob like a rusted key turning. Chisholm's reaction when the facts began to leak was an animal thing. He did not know how to perform contrition. He had only been taught mimicry. Confronted by footage that showed him with his mother and the man who had betrayed them, he grew thinner, as if the image had eaten from him. Amanda called him into a room, with the soft authority of someone whose habits had made her precise. She did not shout. She did not raise a hand. She let the camera do the work of accusation. Chisholm lowered his head, and for the first time, looked like a boy who had been caught before he had become a man. Amarka, confronted by the same images, did something ordinary at first. She denied, with the specificity of someone who expects to be believed. She named excuses, sewed them with neat language. But there is a point at which repetition of falsehood becomes itself a kind of exposure. The more she insisted, the more the house that had covered her misdeeds creaked. People close to her began to avoid her eyes. Staff who had once flattered found their words catching in their throats. She tried to continue life as if nothing had changed, but the mansion had shifted from being a cloak to being a cage. The legal apparatus, once set in motion, moved through stations and clerks that smelled of papers and coffee. Amarka and Admi were arrested in the quiet hours. The police came with lists and warrants and a determination that felt as if it had been manufactured overnight. It had not. It had been purchased by patience and evidence, and the will to demand accountability that money had failed to buy off. Chisholm was taken later, less by dramatic arrest, and more by a fatherless boy's collapse under weight he could neither understand nor carry. The charges were stark and many: kidnapping, conspiracy, professional malpractice. The case had, among its exhibits, footage from the hospital, a ledger with the number clearly matching Philip's file, and the DNA report. Newspapers found the story irresistible in the way the world finds a tale of an upended myth irresistible. They wrote words that tasted of triumph and others that tasted of spin. Amanda, who had once expected privacy to be a shield, now navigated scrutiny. She had wanted truth. She had not wanted the cost. Jacob's vindication came not as a trumpet, but as a slow, stubborn clearing. He was not embraced by everyone. Some neighbors matched their relief with a caution. Forgiveness for a rumor is easier when it has been replaced by truth. But the memory of a verdict remains. Yet, his mechanic's bench began to see customers again, at first tentatively, then with a steadier stream. Mariam watched him with eyes that tried to be patient as he adjusted to a new kind of public life. He found himself learning to carry the weight of being seen in another way, no longer as a man defined by accusation, but as someone whose truth had been confirmed. In the mansion, the two boys found themselves folded into a domestic experiment that could not be hurried. Amanda refused to choose between them the way public opinion had insisted others might. She had, in the years of raising Peter, come to love a child whose trust was absolute. Philip, with his clever hands and quiet intelligence, was a new presence. Amanda chose to keep both, and the house reconfigured itself around that choice. She remodeled the nursery into two spaces, one with tactile toys and braille labels, another with shelves for mechanical puzzles and engines. The household staff learned new schedules. The household's soft laminar currents rearranged themselves around the truth. In some places they smoothed, in others they tore. Peter's recovery was not simple. The fall had left him with injuries that required therapies. And there were moments he seemed to look at the house with questions that could not be answered in the language he had been raised to know. He had come to love Amanda as a mother because she had fed him and mended him. That attachment did not vanish when she discovered his origins. But it changed. It became complicated, layered with new verbs. Amanda found that her love for him was not conditional on blood. It was, in part, created by the daily practice of care they had shared. Still, she found herself watching him when he slept in a way that mixed tenderness with a quiet guilt. Guilt that asked whether a mother could unknow the lies that had been built around them. Philip, for his part, stepped into a home that smelled of money and not always of warmth. He was brilliant and wary. He asked questions about machines and asked about Jacob in a way that made both men smile and ache. He learned to fit his hands into a workshop corner where Jacob repaired bikes and buses, and Jacob watched him like a careful teacher. The two forged an unhurried relationship, built, literally, on objects and work. A broken carburetor, a stubborn starter motor, a watch that needed a mainspring. The toy car, small and flawed, lived on a high shelf as a bridge, something Philip would sometimes ask to hold, and Jacob would hand down with a hand that had known deep shame. The courtroom, when it came to that, was a businesslike corridor of hearings. The public wanted, understandably, a spectacle. But what the law delivered most often is a slow, demanding arithmetic. Testimonies, the dull repetition of lawyers, archival documents, and witness lists. Admi testified against Amarka's claim that he had acted alone, and his voice betrayed a man who had been roped into bigger currents than he had imagined. Amarka chose a brittle defense, a catalogue of differences intended to deny motive. She tried to trade on sisterhood and pity, and in doing so made herself smaller than she had hoped. Chisholm, under the implacable glare of a public that demanded nameable villains, buckled. He had been allowed to learn cruelty without consequence. The consequence now arrived with the bluntness of law. He stood in court as a boy who had been taught by example, and it was harder for him to be read as fully responsible when his learning had been supervised by a woman who had taught him so well. The law, in its way, cannot always separate the child's hand from the adult's instruction. The court recorded, judged, and sentenced in ways that attempted to balance harm with motive. Punishment arrived in forms that did not cure the things that had been done. Amarka lost her social standing and much of her freedom. Dr. Admi lost his license and slept less than he already had. Chisholm was sent to a juvenile facility with a stern rehabilitation program. The legal consequences were a start. They did not grant immediate healing to the people who had been harmed, nor would it have been moral to promise such a thing. Justice in this story was the opening of a wound to allow cleaning. It did not seal it overnight. The media's appetite for finality was not satisfied by the legal verdicts. Opinion pieces debated Amanda's choice to keep both children. Talk shows argued over whether blood or nurture defined parentage. Strangers offered unsolicited declarations of what the right family looked like. Amanda found herself having to locate a fortitude that was not merely managerial. She had to become a woman who could accept the mess of human attachments without allowing the house to become an instrument of other people's judgments. She did not always succeed. There were nights she could be seen in the nursery with a stack of unread books and a tired, half-broken smile. Jacob's public life settled into a new pattern. People who had once scorned him crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Some apologized haltingly, offering small, patronizing gestures that he accepted because they were easier than retelling the story. Mariam, who watched him with the slow arithmetic of someone who had learned to measure daily, adjusted to a life that would always be scarred by the memory of those years. They rebuilt what they could. The bench, a small savings account, a sense of dignity that the verdict restored but did not replenish in full. Inside the mansion, the blue blanket continued to exist as talisman and as witness. Amanda washed it by hand one evening and sat on the nursery floor while it dried over a line, the house's lights making small halos in the fabric. Peter sat nearby, carefully arranging his toys by texture, and Philip sat cross-legged like a small engineer, turning a screw with the concentration of a person who trusted tangibility. Jacob watched them and felt a complicated pride, vindicated, but aware of how much had been lost. There was a tenderness in those evenings that the tabloids could not write about. Amanda learned to parent two children at once. She learned to ask rather than to command. She learned the small humility of a woman who had once believed she could purchase certainty. She took Philip to a private tutor who understood how to challenge gifted children without bruising them. She arranged sessions for Peter that were respectful of his blindness and which taught him ways of moving through a space without fear. She also arranged time for Jacob to teach Philip, and for Jacob and Mariam to be part of the daily life that raised the boys. Not all wounds closed. Chisholm's cruelty had lodged like a splinter in Peter's interior. The blind child, who had known love and terror in equal measures, took longer to trust. He would occasionally wake with tears that had no sound because his grief had not yet found a voice. Amanda learned to sit with those tears, to hold them without trying to remove them by force. She learned to recognize that love could be patient and could also be painfully realistic. Some things cannot be undone. Philip experienced trauma of his own. The knowledge that his early life had been an engineering of other people's wills. He loved the orphanage that had raised him because it had taught him how to be resourceful. He loved Grace for keeping him and for the small acts of tenderness that felt like a scaffolding under his life. He also felt the luxury of the mansion with its odd mixture of plenty and loneliness. When he sat in the Okoro study and watched the city from the veranda, he sometimes wondered which life he belonged to. That question was both a burden and a freedom. Amid the legal fallout, there were quieter social consequences. Amanda faced shareholders who muttered about risk and image. She faced people who assumed that wealth meant moral superiority. She faced occasionally friends who asked whether she had been naive. She found an unexpected ally in an old business rival who valued truth for its own sake more than for its effect on stock prices. That rival offered quiet counsel and a blunt kind of friendship that had nothing to do with publicity. The truth that had been buried under chandeliers and marble no longer slept. It took on shape in hearings and the printed pages of evidence. It became, in some small way, a cautionary example for the city. Wealth could be used to obfuscate, and the poor could be framed with such ease that a man's entire public life might be rewritten. But the revelation did not automatically render the city fair. Prejudice, once expanded in public, does not simply invert because facts change. There were still those who, for reasons of class and habit, would continue to believe the comfortable lies that fit their worldview. Amanda sometimes wandered the mansion at night, looking at the rooms in a way that made her feel like an intruder in her own life. There were places she would not go. The study where Amaka's letters, now evidence, had once been strewn like confetti. There were other places she returned to with softer eyes. The tool bench, where Philip and Jacob sat and turned screws, where they repaired the small engine of a lawnmower, and the engine became, for a moment, a thing that bonded them. Those stolen hours seemed to offer the kind of reclamation that the court could not order. Amid all the reconstruction, a quieter thread threatened to pull the tapestry apart. Amaka's network. She had friends in corners of the city used to bending rules, and they did not vanish when she was placed under charges. Brief, anonymous letters arrived at Jacob's shop and at the orphanage. Warnings couched in civility. One morning, a tire on Jacob's old van was slashed. At night, someone cut the cord of a light outside the orphanage. These acts were small, the kind meant to unsettle more than to harm. They spoke to the sly persistence of people who had always believed they could recover what they lost by spreading fear. Amanda responded, not with bluster, but with practical defenses. She increased security, appointed a new house manager who had a reputation for not being easily bribed, and placed a circulation of cameras that recorded more than they had before. She also used money in the way she knew best, on people, a legal fund for the orphanage, stipends for staff, and an assurance to Grace that the children at St. Mary's would not be left defenseless. Power, when used in the light, can look like restitution. Amaka, once immaculately composed, found her world less sympathetic than she expected. Her sister's love, robust and legally confirmed, had not been used to crush her. Amanda did not revel in victory. She had raised both boys in her house. She had a kind of claim to them that was moral, if not legal. But moral claims are slippery things. Amarka found herself isolated in rooms that had once been filled with people willing to flatter her. The law did not demand she be liked. The law only demanded she be accountable. In the quiet of a holding cell, she often thought of the small things she had envied, the way Amanda could buy happiness in certain forms, and was surprised to find the envy hollow. There was a bitter clarity to her isolation that belonged only to those who discover that the things they took for granted were now gone. Chisholm, still young enough that rehabilitation remained possible, met a program that insisted on confronting the roots of cruelty. He learned that what he had practiced as sport had a cost measured in other people's lives. Whether he would change remained uncertain. The house's damages were deep. In the months that followed, Amanda arranged for psychological support for both boys, understanding that the work of unmaking habit and fear would be long. The city settled into a new normal. The story of the swap became a thing young people referenced as a caution. Elders mentioned it as part of a long catalogue of social anxieties. The press moved on to other narratives that fed the cycles of attention. But for the people in the story, the consequence of that theft did not fade with headlines. Peter learned to move through a house that had been both home and an instrument of theft. Philip learned to tolerate fame he had not asked for and to accept, with wary gratitude, the presence of a father who had once been denied him. For Jacob, the verdict and the reconciliation did not mean the end of struggle. There were nights he woke and thought he still heard men's boots on the street. Mariam learned to sleep with one eye open, because people who suffer public shame often find their bodies hold the memory of violence. Yet there were simmering moments of joy that could not be legislated. The sound of Philip's small laugh at the dinner table, Peter learning to navigate the courtyard with confidence, Amanda sitting on the bench outside the workshop and listening to Jacob explain the simplest physics of a wheel. Amanda's final act in the official arc was not theatrical. She did not stand in the press and make declarative statements. She went instead to the court and testified with the stubborn sobriety of a woman who had discovered a terrible thing in the most ordinary of records. She had nothing to prove beyond the facts. The facts carried their own burden. In the courthouse lobby, she encountered Amarka one last time before the legal wheels turned fully. Amarka looked less like a twin and more like someone she had once known in a different world. Their exchange was muted, two words that could have been the start of forgiveness or the end of a relationship. Neither of them knew yet which it would be. The mansion remained, even after the truth had been dug out of its safes and sent through courtrooms, a vast container of questions. Wealth had not been destroyed by the revelation. It had simply been forced to account for itself. Amanda learned to make her house less of a mausoleum and more of a home, but even homes accumulate the ghosts of their histories. There were nights when she would stand on the veranda, a glass of something cool in her hand, and listen to the city's distant hum. The truth, now public, did not absolve her entirely. It had suggested that motherhood is not defined solely by biology. It had also suggested that the act of care can both heal and wound. In the months after the arrests, Amanda and Jacob and the two boys attempted to make a family that looked less like a legal paper than like a human project. They built rituals small as screws. Saturday afternoons at the workshop, a shared soup on rainy days, the careful reading of stories with textured pages for Peter and diagrams for Philip. These rituals were clumsy and brave. Sometimes old suspicions reared. Sometimes forgiveness had to be negotiated again like currency. The city's appetite for closure never fully disappeared. There were murmurs among those who felt the court's sentence had been insufficient, and there were others who argued the law had been too harsh. Both arguments had a point. Justice is never tidy. The important thing was that the mechanism for truth had been found and used. The poor mechanic had been framed, but he had been seen. The mansion had hidden the truth, but the truth had been excavated. Yet even in victory, the story left a residue of question. Who, precisely, chooses what defines a mother? What does a child lose when their earliest years are shaped by institutional places? What does a man's reputation cost when a city decides it needs a scapegoat? The answers would not all come in court rulings. They would come in the small acts of repair and in the unglamorous daily practices of life. On an evening when the air smelled of rain and cooked peppers, Amanda walked through the nursery with both boys. Peter's hand was in hers, his small fingers trusting and sure. Philip trailed behind, carrying a small device he had made from a discarded radio and a few screws. Jacob followed at a small distance, his hands smelling faintly of oil and grease, and Mariam walked with him like a steadying presence. The house hummed around them, the lights, the refrigerators, the predictable clatter of domestic engines. And outside, through the iron gate, the city continued its noisy life. In the nursery, the blue blanket lay folded on a high shelf. It had lost some of its saturated hue, but retained a shape like memory. Amanda touched it with reverence, and then turned it into a small ritual. She would bring it out sometimes, and let the boys feel the fabric. Let it be a story rather than a secret. The toy car lived on another shelf, its missing wheel a badge of endurance rather than defeat. There was a quiet that settled between them that had been hard-won. It was not the same as innocence, nor did it pretend that nothing terrible had happened. It was, if anything, a truce with the past. They had found one another. They had found truth. And they had to discover whether forgiveness could be something other than forgetting. Amanda thought about the mansion as a place that had once hidden things. The truth, sure, but also small human failings she had allowed to go unexamined. If the house could be made to hold both truth and repair, perhaps it could also be a place that made room for the long, slow task of mending. The final images were not triumphant. They were a kind of steadying, domestic tableau. Jacob bent over a carburetor at his bench, while Philip watched, learning the patience of a man who fixes by touch. Peter sat on a cushion with tactile toys, his fingers moving over shapes with confident care. Amanda stood in the doorway watching them, and felt a sorrow that was also a strange gratitude. Justice had been initiated. Truth was no longer in a drawer. The mansion had been the place where both the greatest wrong and its exposure had happened. It was also now where repair began. Outside, the city continued. Markets hawking cassava and tomatoes, buses coughing into the dusk. The odd sound of a lullaby from an open window. Inside, a woman who had once thought money could buy certainty replaced that belief with something more durable. The practice of looking. It was not heroic. It was simple and arduous. The poor mechanic had been framed, yes, and the truth had been buried under marble. But now it had been dug up, carried into daylight, and given to those it had been stolen from. Whether it would ever return everything it had taken was another story. If this story has pulled you in and left you wanting more, to follow what will happen to these people as they live with the consequences, leave a comment about what you think should happen next, and subscribe to stay with them. The work of truth and the slow business of healing is far from over, and sometimes the only thing to do is to keep watching as ordinary lives try to stitch themselves back together.